Good day and welcome to another episode of On the Couch with Jill. I am at a place that became a home. It became a journey, and I walked it with a phenomenal doctor. And to introduce this man, I need a 15 minutes just for introduction. But this is a man that helped me on my journey, a man that made me feel that I was just not a number, that I was important on this journey of fertility, that gave me hope and courage. And I'm back here at Wynand Fertility Clinic, and I'm speaking to one of my favorite people, Dr. Johannes van Waart, the founder, the director, the owner of Wynand Fertility Clinic. Welcome to the couch, Doc.
Thank you very much, Jill. I think it's a big privilege for me to talk to you. I mean, it's always nice to see you, and I see you every year, and it's like sort of reuniting old bonds, and it's always wonderful for me to see what you're doing for other people. And I think it is a huge and a very big task and very important, because fertility awareness is probably a thing that is very close to my heart. And I think you're doing really a great job, and it's always nice to hear what you're up to. And this new venture of yours, I think, is probably one of the most exciting ventures that I've come across in the world of fertility. So thank you very much for all the trouble that you take and the special journey that you had, which I'm sure will add a lot of value to the lives of other people in the world of fertility and also wanting to conceive in future.
Absolutely. And I thank you, doctor, for that. And is it a fertility journey or is it an infertility journey? I always get confused with the two. How do I'm on a journey of fertility or am I on a journey of infertility?
I think it's in the eye of the beholder. To me, the word infertility has got a little bit of a negativity to it. If you're on your fertility journey, it sounds as if the chances of getting to success is probably going to be a bit more realistic.
Okay.
And I think with the science as it moves now, this dream comes true for people who in a number of years ago probably might not have had the chance of falling pregnant. So I would try to probably term it a fertility journey and not an infertility journey.
So I walked into this practice 18 years ago, to be exact. And I came from another doctor and I was heartbroken. I was devastated. And I had a nurse that came to draw blood and she said, my sister works at this practice called Wynand Fertility. And I'm like, she said, just try it. And I thought, no, I'm not going to try another doctor. And I can honestly say when I walked in, and I said this with Lazan on the last podcast, the smell of the freshly brewed coffee, the feeling of home. And I think I started when your practice was at home. And that gave me a little bit more of hope. And when you said to me, okay, you've got PCOS, and I looked at you with this blank expression on my face. Can you explain to the people what is PCOS?
Yes, certainly. I think if we look at fertility as a basic part, there are a number of issues there. Firstly, you have the male issues, which we're not going to deal with today. Then you have the group which we call idiopathic. In other words, you can't clearly find something that is wrong. And then you get the female part, of which most important would be not ovulating regularly. And one of the big reasons women won't ovulate regularly is PCOS. It stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. In actual fact, they're probably going to change that now in the next year or two, because there's also what we call a metabolic part to that. So in other words, a general health part. And then obviously there's also the fertility part.
Yeah.
Now, PCOS, the criteria that we normally would use is called the Rotterdam criteria. And then there are three parts to that. The one is that the ovaries have to look polycystic. So in other words, there are a lot of small little follicles there. And they don't actually mature on their own.
Okay. So can I quickly, because I've been here a patient for a very long time. So for those who don't understand what PCOS is, this is how doctor broke it down for me in layman's terms. That poly, meaning many, cysts on your ovaries. So in a normal cycle, and if I had pen and paper, I would have drawn this for you. Doctor would draw this, and then this is your ovaries. And every 28 days, you get your menstrual cycle, and your eggs on your ovaries is supposed to get bigger and bigger. It comes down, and it either gets fertilized and embedded in the uterus. Am I correct, doctor?
Yes, you listen well.
And then you are pregnant. But for those that doesn't get fertilized, it comes down, and you have and your lining of your womb also get thicker at this point in time, preparing for pregnancy. And that's where a woman's period actually comes from. But for us, that is PCOS, our eggs don't get big enough to come down. Am I correct?
Yes.
See, I listened.
So what happens is, under normal circumstances, if you have regular cycles, the first part is where the follicle, and the follicle is the house of the egg, will grow to a size of about 2 centimeters, and inside of that follicle there will be a little egg. And that egg will be released. It will be picked up by the tuber fallopius. It will meet a little lucky sperm there, and fertilization will take place, and that will come down and implant in the uterus. If you don't fall pregnant, then that follicle becomes a corpus luteum that makes progesterone, that supports the inside lining to accept a little embryo. And then if there's not a pregnancy, that will break down and get a progesterone withdrawal bleed, which is exactly the same what a period is. So regular periods are very, very important in the journey of fertility. Now, with polycystic ovary patients, those follicles don't grow. So they produce a little bit of estrogen in a sort of long time, and there are many of them, so it will still build up the inside lining that's built up by estrogen. And at some point in time, you will still get a period, but we would call it a breakdown bleed. And that can be 2 months, 3 months. Some PCOS patients don't actually bleed at all. So first part, the Rotterdam criteria is polycystic ovaries. The second part is that there has to be clinical or biochemical evidence of excess of androgens, male hormones. So you can either draw blood, or sometimes you have excessive hair growth. And the third part is that there's irregular periods or no periods at all. And then we will probably have a suspicion that it's polycystic ovarian syndrome. And in most cases, it will also go along with insulin resistance. So your insulin levels will be high, and the patients will really struggle with weight. And to lose weight for somebody who's got polycystic ovarian syndrome is 4 times harder than anybody else.
Absolutely. We look at the food and we get fat.
Yeah. But the main thing is, yes, lifestyle helps. So if you can lose 5 to 10% of your weight, you don't have to get to the ideal weight. You improve your chance of having spontaneous ovulation by a big increment. And that's why lifestyle in the journey of fertility is so important.
You're making me nervous now. Because you're saying that, I lost the weight now, that I'm not on the journey of fertility any longer, and I've done the lifestyle change, so I'm not on anything. So you're telling me I could still fall pregnant?
Well, that depends on the quality of the eggs, and the quality of eggs are actually coupled to the age of the patient.
Okay, so I'm too old now.
But also, I think a very important part of the lifestyle is the metabolic part in that. And that are really things that can impact on your chance of living longer and have heart disease and have diabetes later in your life. So somebody who's diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome has a 40% chance of developing high blood pressure later on in their lives, and also a 20% chance of developing diabetes. So it is important to keep your lifestyle factors and your weight as good as you possibly can. And then the last part is also the psychological part. Now, people are not, just because they are a little bit overweight or have PCOS, has a depressed mood. But the whole metabolic part, underlying physiology, actually predisposes them to really struggle emotionally. So it's a big, complex syndrome, and that's why it's called polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it has multiple factors, of which we would normally deal mainly with the fertility part, but it is also important to address the metabolic part and also the psychological part. And that's where I think Lizanne came in and say that is something very special to deal with that later on in the life.
Absolutely. And actually, I've heard many things that people say that if you got PCOS, you're also prone to get some things like ovarian cancer. Is that a myth, or is it the truth, or is it possible?
I think ovarian cancer is not such a big problem, but very often cancer of the uterus would be, because in a natural cycle where you ovulate, the first part, follicle makes estrogen to make the little glands on the inside become fertile. And once you've ovulated, you get progesterone from the corpus luteum that actually makes those glands mature in order to accept that embryo and support that hormonally through the pregnancy. But if you don't ovulate, then you have estrogen only or unopposed estrogen. And that increases your chances multiple in getting cancer of the uterus and the inside lining. So the patients that don't have regular periods are at risk of that. It's not so much related to ovarian cancer, but the health risk would be uterine cancer.
Okay. So, doctor, a lot of women only come and see you once they married and now they decide, oh, we need to have a baby, but we're taking too long. When does women actually need to start seeing a gynecologist?
Yes, okay, that's a very good question. I think very, very relevant. I think what we see more and more now, we also have patients that actually volunteer to donate eggs for people who cannot fall pregnant on their own. And those are normally young and fertile women. And we see more and more of them having less and less eggs.
Wow.
Which is really troubling us. So we see 23, 24, 25-year-old girls with very few eggs left. So we can do a blood test called the anti-Müllerian hormone test, and that's a little hormone that gets secreted by the eggs that you have left on your ovary. Okay. Now, if you have a higher AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, then you have more eggs left. That gives us an idea of global fertility. Now, if you are extending that and you're extending your professional career, it is definitely a very good thing to give the fertility specialist just a visit to make sure and say, have I got time enough? Can I postpone? And then there are a number of options. If you do have enough eggs left, then probably you have a little bit of time. But many women are pursuing professional careers and only pitch up here at 36 or after they met the man of their lives. And then we see you don't have many eggs left, because not only does the quality of the eggs reduce with increasing age, but also the number of eggs that you have left does decrease. So you get it from both sides. And in those cases, we can certainly talk about freezing of eggs. We talk about social egg freezing. So you actually freeze that egg in time. Or if you have met the right partner, but you don't want to start your fertility or your family straight away, you can freeze embryos, which can be used later on, and we also freeze them in time. So if you freeze them at age 33 and you want to start your family at 39, your chances of falling pregnant is just as good as the day when you donated and got those eggs out.
So also, I for those that don't know in layman's terms, what is an embryo? Because people always ask, what is an embryo and what is just an egg? The egg is obviously just on its own.
Yes. So I think there are two important points here. The egg is what you retrieve from the ovary if you go through a mini IVF cycle, in vitro fertilization cycle. And then you fertilize that egg with a sperm, and then it makes a little embryo. Okay. And the embryo normally goes from 1 cell to 2 cells on day 1. On day 2, it goes to 4 cells, and then it goes to 8 cells on day 3. And the first 3 days mainly driven by the genetics of the egg. So if you have a good egg, the embryo will do well initially. Then the sperm comes to that party a little bit stronger, and the embryo on day 4 makes a little blob, which you call a compact. And then on day 5, it's a fluid-filled cavity that expands from 1, which is the minimum, and 5, that is the maximum. And inside of that embryo, there are 2 components. The inner cell mass that makes the baby, and the trophectoderm that makes a little placenta. And those we can grade individually, A, B, or C. But you must also remember that from egg to day 5 embryo or blastocyst, there's a fallout rate. So on average, you would get 1 embryo from 3 to 4 eggs. Okay. So if you have 4 eggs frozen, doesn't mean you're going to get 4 babies. It means you have about a 50% chance of, well, you have a chance of having 1 embryo, and normally the chance of these embryos are between 50 and 60% maximum to give you a baby.
So the embryo is not, the baby is not made yet outside. Like, people say, oh, it's the child that's built outside the body kind of thing.
Well, I think you can look at it from different angles. An embryo is not viable unless it gets implanted. Okay. And so we will implant it by fertilization has taken place, and there's a number of cells that actually have taken that. So some people would argue and say that is life. some people would say it's not there because it still needs the uterus.
So is that goes the same like when I had a miscarriage at 12 weeks? Is that the embryo?
Yes. So there are also a couple of things important here. Is what we always focus on. Firstly, is to try to rule out human factors. So we want to make sure that everything is good as we can get it. The hormonal support of the embryo is good. The inside lining of the uterus is good. The timing is perfect. And then we transfer that embryo. Now, if the embryo is normal, the chances are very good it will give you a baby.
Okay.
If there's some problem in that embryo and it's abnormal, then in most cases, nature will be on our side and you'll either not fall pregnant or you will have a miscarriage. And in most cases, that's nature's way of protecting humankind against having abnormal babies. So it is a very traumatic thing to go through with many women because they, in many cases, feel they did something wrong, which is not true. I think it's just not meant to be in that point in time. We can't test those embryos if they are needed to be tested, but in most cases, it's nature just also playing its role.
That took me now back, doctor, to not the last time I was in your seat, but with my last miscarriage where you said to me, I'm reassuring you, Jill, it's nothing that you've done. You know, it's almost God's way of protecting you. I remember you said to me that your child could have been born with a hole in its heart, and then you have to make a decision later in life or later in the pregnancy to terminate or keep. But it's still a hard thing to go through.
Very, very tough.
It's still a very tough thing to go. So what you're saying, doctor, is that girls or young ladies at 23, 24 can come here or wherever they want to go and have their eggs frozen to have kids at the age of 35.
Yes. So I think what ideally we would like to see is that women know if their parents or their mothers struggled and went to menopause early, then definitely it's a big yes. You must come and just be reassessed and just make sure that you're okay in terms of fertility wish later in your life. Do you have time or not? Okay. If you don't have time in your professional career or your studies and you haven't met the right partner or whatever your personal circumstances are there, then one should say that one can freeze those eggs and we keep them. Okay. If you have the right partner and you're not there, just come and make sure that you're okay and you have got time. Because with freezing eggs and freezing embryos, the main purpose is not to give you a family. The main purpose is if you cannot complete your family on your own, to give you a little bit of an insurance policy that there is something left in the bank as an investment for you in your journey of fertility. So the ideal would be that you complete your family on your own and you say, we're not going to use that material. Second prize is always to say, okay, I've got okay with my first baby, but now I want a second baby and I've ran into trouble. And I would almost say the third prize is that you say you use that to have your first baby. And if you're lucky enough to have enough eggs or enough embryos frozen, that you can have your second baby with that.
So now as science evolved, there's more options for women. Yes, basically.
Many more.
Yeah. And, doctor, they always say, when we start this journey, they always say, you as the woman need to go check you out. It's your fault. It's your problem. But I'm sure men have fertility issues too. Or
yes.
Am I?
It's a 50-50 split on women and men. But I think mostly women are more responsible. So they go for their gynae checkups. They talk to their doctor. Males don't do that as a general thing because males don't have male gynaes. When they go at 50, they start going to the urologist to make sure their prostate is okay. Absolutely. And for other things. But if there's any doubt, there's definitely a very big plus to have just a sperm analysis, which is not a difficult thing to do, just to make sure everything is okay. But lifestyle plays a hugely important part in that. Yeah, because males that smoke and vape, excessive alcohol use, excessive overweight certainly would be on the back foot.
Yeah. You're going to give poor quality sperm, so it's not only our fault, ultimately, But doctor, there is also the signs that, I think patients I certainly came in and sat on your seat and I thought, this man is going to he's going to play God and give me a baby. But there's different factors that obviously, like you explained, that cause that non-successful rate, I guess.
Yes.
But how important is it? A lot of girls, like I said, come only to you when they want to have a family. Do young girls need to see a gynecologist, whether they are sexually active or not? How do they check what's going on?
Yes, I think where we can add a little bit of value just to explain to patients what the road ahead might look like.
Yeah.
In other words, make sure that you don't do things that's going to be detrimental to your fertility health. So smoking and vaping, alcohol, making sure you do some regular exercise, eat well. So lifestyle things. And I think that we also want to try and assure the young patients that gynecologists don't bite.
They don't bite.
So because it's a big scary thing, it's a very big decision to go to a gynecologist for the first time.
Yeah.
But there are many factors that impact on female health. And I think women are the architects of their own health.
Yeah.
But you need the information to know what to do. And I think that's what we do when they come here initially. And then also to give them a little bit of a roadmap about their female health on the way forward until they get to the menopause and when they get older than that and what you should do. And I think very often it makes it easier for those patients to plan not their fertility part, but their family part, their gynecological part, their menopause part, to make them understand what is the right thing to do and what the science says. And the science is very, very sort of strong and evolving at quite a rapid pace. So there are new things coming out there that's going to make women live long, but we want them to have a quality of life and chase their dreams.
Absolutely. I should have come here when I was 20 years old. But doctor, I had artificial insemination. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And then there's the IVF. What is
in vitro fertilization?
Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yes. So normally where we would start in this journey to look at all the factors involved, the male factors and the female factors, and then get a plan. Okay. So we cannot improve male health. We can improve we can improve male health, but not sperm. Sperm is what you have. We can work with sperm in different ways. With females, it's a bit easier or maybe difficult sometimes. So if those ones who don't ovulate, to help them to ovulate. For the patients who do ovulate, sometimes we help them to make 2 little follicles. So hopefully we'll get 2 little eggs. But we must also remember at age 40, on average, 3 out of every 4 eggs that a woman make will be abnormal. Wow. So we would help them to make 2 little follicles, get the window of fertility or the fertile window right, and tell them when the fertile period would be. And that's very often what we would call a home plan, stimulated home plan. Now, if that doesn't work and there are different factors impacting on that, then we will talk about artificial insemination. Now, artificial insemination is where we help the woman to make 2 little follicles. Hopefully, they will each carry an egg, but there's always a chance that the one egg might not be normal and the tube misses picking up the egg. But then on the day when ovulation takes place, we will get the sperm from the partner and prepare that sperm. So we literally let them swim against one another. And all the good, strong guys, we take them. And the guys that are not so strong, we just throw them away. And then we put that with a very soft little plastic catheter inside of the uterus. So we put a better prepared sperm sample closer to the target. That means the chance of meeting the right little egg and having the right sperm ready is 2 to 2.5 times better than trying on your own.
Okay.
And that is the artificial insemination. And the chance of success is somewhere between 15 and 20% chance at best, because the tube needs to pick up the egg and the egg has to be normal, although the sperm might be good quality. That's artificial insemination. So fertility takes place inside of the tube of fallopius, and the embryo moves down to implant inside of the uterus.
And doctor has no idea the quality of the follicle at that point.
No. You can see the follicle, but you don't know where it carries an egg or not. Whether the egg, if it carries the egg, looks normal. Whether the sperm and the egg gets together, whether it's a quality embryo, where it will develop and whether it will implant. So if it doesn't work, we're left with many questions. And then we would go over to in vitro fertilization after 1 or 2 or 3 inseminations. Because then we would stimulate the patient to make many follicles, as many as they could give us. When they get to the right size, we will trigger the ovulation so that we know exactly when they ovulate. Then half an hour before they ovulate, we will retrieve those eggs under sedation where they get very light anesthetic, and we put a needle through the vaginal wall into the follicle. We get the follicle fluid out, and inside of that should be the egg. Okay. And now for the first time, we know whether that follicle carries an egg or not, whether the egg looks normal, and whether it is mature. And then we can put sperm, good quality sperm, with the egg, which we call in vitro fertilization. Or if needed, then we take 1 champion sperm per egg and we inject it into the egg, which we call ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Wow. And that will very often be if there is not a big number of sperm, or where the sperm have lots of abnormalities, we pick out the champions.
Okay.
And then fertilization takes place, and the embryo develops from day 1 to day 5, which is the blastocyst, as I've explained before. Yeah. And that day 5 blastocyst we will implant inside of the uterus. Now, in general terms, it's about 4 to 4.5 times more successful than the artificial insemination. But in absolute terms, probably at best somewhere between 50 and 60% chance per cycle. And if we are lucky enough to have more than 1 embryo, we can freeze the other ones for future use as needed.
So I always got confused with that, how it looks and how it's designed. But Doctor, what is, on this journey, how important is it? For me, it was very important to have the right doctor, not only knowledgeable, but has a little bit of empathy, and that is what I went to a few doctors before I came here. And after the last doctor, I said, no way am I doing this. I walked out of that practice. I felt like a number, and they said, here's a diet. Come back in 6 months. And I was like, is that it? You didn't even tell me what's wrong. How important is it to have that doctor on this journey? You can't go to a normal gynae.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the difference between a fertility specialist and a normal gynecologist, we all normal gynecologists, but then we do another 2 years of super specialization to become fertility doctors. Now, I think it's a very difficult question that you're asking me, because I think our work as doctors are to help patients to fall pregnant.
Yeah.
So we get trained scientifically, and I think very often you feel if you do the science, you do the best you can, you've done your job. But the job is much bigger than that, because you work with trauma. And I think from personal experience, we've gone through the fertility route ourselves, and I think it's part of why we do what we do, is there's a very, very big psychological component to that. And it's very often underestimated. And the reason why people don't come for second rounds and follow up is not because they don't fall pregnant. It's because the psychological part of the journey is so difficult. And that's the biggest dropout rate. And I think when we started our unit, I think it was a big part of what we wanted to look after patients. We cannot guarantee success. Fortunately, we have much more successes than we have non-successes. But what we would like to do is just for patients to understand what we do, to try and give them that empathy and to walk away with them. And I think that's a very personal thing. And I think patients should judge that. Absolutely. I cannot comment on the sort of how other people do it.
Yeah, no, you can't because it's your colleagues ultimately. But I can honestly say that I couldn't have done this without you. Besides doing what you need to do to fix me, but the way you speak, doctor, and the way you deal with patients is absolutely phenomenal. It's to the point. You give me the facts. I can speak from experience. You give me the facts, but there's this kindness that comes through, and I actually just want to say thank you for that, because you gave me where I felt hopeless. You would say, "Don't worry, we'll try again." You tried to make me feel that it was okay to, when the losses came, that you said it's not your fault. It is not anything that you've done. And without that, I don't think I would have made this journey, to be very honest.
Yeah, I think from my side, when I've gone for medical procedures, it's important for me to try and understand what they're trying to achieve, because it makes your rehabilitation much easier, and it makes you understand what you should and what you shouldn't do. And I think in our journey, it's important for us that patients understand what we try and achieve. It makes it easier to see if we make a change in something. But I think what my sort of view of this is, once somebody walks into our unit here, you're part of my family.
Absolutely.
And I think the one thing I say is I will never do something to one of our patients that I wouldn't want somebody do to my family, because my family is very special to me, and then makes the patients that are here special to us. And I think that's something that I'm trying to practice. I don't do that perfectly, but I think it makes it easier to stand in the shoes of somebody who's here and explain the things and make them hopefully understand, and taking hands and walking forward.
Absolutely. I have to agree with that. So, Doctor, before we wrap, I've got you here for 30 minutes and I know you need to go home. Lisan is probably waiting for dinner or something. But miscarriages. I know you explained it, but October is infant loss month. And for me, I need to take a breath here. I've been through that loss. And you saying, I need to get my emotions under control here. But you saying that it wasn't my fault, that, all of those things, it reassured me. But what was it, in our mind as a woman, it's something that we've done, or is it something that we do? How do we know, or how does it happen? What causes, I know you said it's, abnormalities that causes miscarriages, but it's not, I need to understand it, from a scientific, I need a fact kind of scientifically.
I think very often the one conception that I think is not right, people very often think if you have a miscarriage, you have a loss. Then it's a perfect baby and something terrible happened.
Okay.
And once you fall pregnant, very often your dreams start. And that gets shattered. And it's very, very difficult. But to have a miscarriage, in most cases, was never meant to be. From the word go, it was never meant to be. And patients experience sometimes that they did something terrible. This was the perfect pregnancy, and they did something, or something very, very sort of invasive happened, and that's why you get a miscarriage. And that's not the way it happens. So if you do things wrong, you will probably not fall pregnant. You cannot cause a miscarriage if that baby is normal. It's very unlikely. So I think sometimes the perception around that, and 1 in 7 women gets miscarriages. It is just a fact of life, but that's also method in the madness, and that protects us as humans against abnormalities. Okay. And sometimes for some people it doesn't happen, and it is a very, very difficult thing to face. And I think it's probably the most difficult thing that can happen to any woman.
Yeah.
But I firmly believe that in life there's a bigger path than that, and we all have our ups and our downs, and very often the kindness that comes from that and the understanding from that protects other people against it. And I think that's part of your journey. What you are doing so much more than I can ever do in my fertility sort of practice, where you make people aware. And with that, having gone through that road, you've touched probably a lot more hearts than I have touched. And I think it's a wonderful thing. That's why I fully support what you're doing. It's a great privilege to be here.
Thank you, Doctor. The last thing, if there's anything you can tell any couple that want to start this journey, from a scientific point of view, what do they need to do first?
Okay. I think the one catchphrase is nothing beats lifestyle.
Yeah.
So make sure that you don't do things you're not supposed to do. And intuitively, everybody knows that. You have to do a little bit of exercise. You have to eat right. You don't smoke and vape and do these things that can really be poison to your body. But I think if you're unsure, rather just pay a fertility specialist a visit and say, I'm just here to check out if I'm okay, have I got time? We're not trying to take the work away from the general gynecologist, and there are many, many good gynecologists, but very often the focus would be on female health, not necessarily on fertility.
Okay.
So I think if you have a gynecologist that you're very comfortable with, and they give you the fertility advice that you need, and it's not just only that you ovulate or not, but what are your chances of falling pregnant, then I think that would be okay. But if you're unsure, I think paying one of the fertility specialists in your area visit will definitely be to your advantage in the long run.
Absolutely. And the last thing from my side, Doctor, Thank you for joining me on this podcast, and thank you for creating awareness that, if you have an issue, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of everything. There is options. And as science improve, there's more options, if I can put it that way. But also thank you for what you've done for me in the 18 years that I've been coming here. Thank you for making my journey a little bit easier and always being straight with me. I appreciated that. Always saying that this is the options, this is what's happening, and maybe it's time to now look at the end of this, and I appreciate that. And still being my doctor. And I know Lizanne was saying earlier that doctor's going to retire soon. I don't know where I'm going to go after that. But I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, doctor, for everything that you've done. Not only in the fertility treatment, but even now.
No, Jill, I think it was a great privilege. And I've got bad news for Lizanne. I'm not going to retire soon. So I might work a little bit less, but I still enjoy what I do. And I remember a phrase from Jack Nicklaus, who's a golfer, and he said he's going to stop playing golf now. He's going to retire. And say, what are you going to do? They say, I'm going to do things that I like. And I say, what do you like? I say, well, I like playing golf. So I think I would probably still be around for quite a while. But I think focusing and helping people and spreading information, I think, is very close to our hearts. We'll still be there to treat, definitely. I will still be around for quite a while. And also having family like you. I mean, we've got a couple of very special patients in our practice, and you're one of the very special ones with all the projects that you do. So I'm sure every year that I see you, I look forward to the visit next year and see what you've been up to. So it was a great privilege. And I think if you got something from it, it's a big... Yeah, it's very special. Thanks for.
So thank you for joining me today, Doctor. And I hope we can do this again maybe next year, because I don't think that as the technology evolves, people need to know that there's more that they can do. That it doesn't, for me, it was the hardest thing. And I remember your words when you said to me, don't use certain things in your life to guard yourself. Feel your emotions, feel your hurt, and then make a proper decision. So not only were you a doctor, but you were a little bit of a psychologist too. So thank you again, Doctor. Thank you for joining me. So that was another episode of On the Couch with Jill. And this was a very emotional episode for me. It took me back to certain things. But like I said, this is my home, my fertility home, my doctor's home. And I love coming here because not only do I get helped health-wise, but I also get the emotional support here. So if you ever need a doctor, come to Wayland Fertility. You won't be sorry. So till next time, I hope to catch you on my couch again.